Looks like Chinese AI firms are coming after Anthropic's AI, according to Anthropic. What the hell is that all about? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Dave Linthicum is Not AI. I'm Dave, an AI SME and an AI skeptic, looking at AI with a balanced perspective. Let's get started. So keep in mind, I'm not a news channel, but I am going to cover some things from time to time that I think I find interesting and you guys may find interesting as well. But this, according to CNN, and you can see the link in the description, the Chinese unicorns DeepSeek, Minimax, and Moonshot AI created over 2,400 fraudulent accounts and trained their models using over 16 million exchanges with Claude, a process known as distillation. We talked about that before. Anthropic alleged in a Monday blog post. So we're likely to see more stories like this out there. In fact, I'm surprised we don't see more of them, as many people are just standing up these very valuable LLMs, and they're available online. Typically can be accessed via free account. You can train other models from those models. It's called distillation. And many of the large language models that are outside of the country that may not have access to some of the higher end chips, the Blackwell chip, for example, from NVIDIA, may be going this route because they're limited in the size and scope and how they can train these existing models that they're trying to build. And obviously, it's a model race right now. The best LLM is supposed to win the day. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but they're under the impression that if they can access somebody else's data, bring their knowledge over, it's going to make them more valuable. And so we just saw another instance of this. And by the way, this isn't the first time we've seen it. We saw it a while ago. And certainly when DeepSeek started, they, admitted right out of the gate that they were using distillation to train many of the models because some of the limitations that they had on the processing technology that they're allowed to use. So Anthropic saw that they were bombarded with API inquiries to harvest responses, training rival models on the stolen parametric knowledge. That's what it's called, when the knowledge is actually in the models. This covert IP theft sidesteps hacking by reverse engineering capabilities through sheer volume. So Anthropic detected it via behavioral monitoring and blocked the actors, but warns of escalating U.S.-China AI espionage risks amid tightening export controls. The incident underscores vulnerabilities in frontier AI assets. And again, we're going to see more of this. Now, what's going on with China is they don't have access to some of the higher end GPU chips. Blackwell, for example, I believe that's what it's called, which NVIDIA makes. My understanding is they got a few of them that got over there some way, but they're limited in the kind of processing that they can do. So distillation becomes kind of an attractive option for them. So instead of training themselves on data, on raw data, they're able to find on the open internet and build better models, which you're going to need these high-end chips to do. They just basically, go siphon the knowledge from the other LLM assets out there, and that happened to Claude. And by the way, I assume it's happening to everybody out there. Anybody that has a LLM that's online, Gemini, Grok, all those sorts of things are going to be open for these kinds of, well, they call it attacks, but in essence, what they're doing is using legitimate mechanisms to create an account, open up the API, and start sucking the resources down from these guys. So it's a bit of a spy versus spy kind of thing. This is one of many I think we've seen so far. This is probably the most egregious, if Anthropic is correct. You got to remember, they're asserting this, it's alleged at this point. But I would be it's pretty sure that this is happening. So what is distillation? Well, model distillation lets attackers replicate elite AI like Claude by fine-tuning cheaper models or stolen query outputs, compressing proprietary knowledge without direct theft. And so what they're able to do is to enhance their models by talking to other models. In essence, that's what it means. And since these models are online, you're able to access them with APIs, and you can have an API conversation where in essence you're telling your model to go learn everything that you can from that model until I guess your API is canceled or something. And that's what they're doing. So they're trying to enhance their models by replicating these elite models out there, Claude, Grok, ChatGPT, things like that. And it's going to be something that's ongoing. As long as we're allowing access to these LLMs via APIs, this is going to be possible. And so people who are savvy, typically lots of companies out of the country who may not have other options are going to figure out how to exploit this. So what is unique here is the scale. The operation involved 24,000 fake accounts querying at high volume, evading rate limits until Anthropic's anomaly detection kicked in, highlighting API abuse, as is their option with access to their model. So what they saw is 24,000, fake accounts show up. They were using them in a consistent way, in essence, accessing them through the API to gather the parametric knowledge that they needed. And they had an anomaly detection system where they would see if there's some sort of weird use. In other words, you can kind of tell it's not being used in a proper way, which flagged the accounts, and evidently they were taken down. And most of the LLMs out there have these kinds of protections, but in many cases, they can go on for a few days, a few weeks sometimes, even more, without detection. And these guys are going to get a little bit more sophisticated about that. They're going to figure out how to avoid anomaly detection, the ability to have random patterns and how they're accessing the APIs, things like that. And so again, it's going to be the spy versus spy thing with these guys. So again, using the advanced monitoring, Anthropic terminated the accounts, enhanced safeguards, and went public to deter copycats. Proven proactive defense works against shadow operations. This is the way you go about it. In other words, you stop the attack, you identify it, you identify the anomaly, you figure out how it was exploited. In other words, what are they doing here to get around, some of the protections in creating fake accounts, things like that. And they're just going to switch up their MO, so to speak. So in other words, Anthropic is going to, it's almost like whack-a-mole, stop them from attacking their account or accessing their account through these fake account mechanisms. They're just going to switch their tactics up and get at it in other ways. And it seems to work pretty well. So Anthropic is going to have to stay on their toes and put in advanced governance and advanced security mechanisms to try to make sure we minimize this in the future. And that's all they can do is minimize it. I don't think they can eliminate it. If you make these LLMs open to the public, in other words, they're going to have value for lots of different operations that people are using them for, you're going to open yourself up to these kinds of attacks. So this isn't just corporate theft. Claude's safeguards and reasoning powers are strategic assets, making Distillation a vector for tech supremacy battles. So people are rightfully concerned about this. In other words, if we're adding value or going to have value be the proprietary nature of many of these LLMs, some of the unique value and behaviors they're able to provide. And obviously, we use them every day and applications use them every day. They're basically a back-end system that provides access to huge amounts of intelligence that can enhance the way in which we, write, speak, process, accounts, things like that. And their ability to replicate those capabilities or put them over in their other LLM, is going to be a concern because suddenly you don't have any strategic differentiator in your model because they stole everything. And I do think that many of the LLMs right now are kind of hitting a limit. In other words, they've learned pretty much everything they can. There's going to be an ongoing organic learning mechanism that occurs as we move into the future. But right now we're just tuning them, making them a little faster, a little better, making them a bit more responsive, fewer hallucinations, things like that. So we're not seeing the advances that we saw just a few years ago, certainly not in 2022 when the first LLMs dropped. So these sorts of things where it is stealing from each other is going to be a concern because, again, if they are able to adopt all of your features and your core values, then they're going to be able to beat you in the market or at least be even with you in the market, which probably isn't fair for many of these large LLM providers, that spend, many millions of dollars every time they train these models, and that's what they cost. And there is an AI arms race going on. So firms hoard models amid chip bans, expect more, such probes, distillation demands, global norms, watermarking, and query forensics to protect innovation. So the providers out there, the LLM providers out there like Anthropic, but there's, others as well. There's 150 damn LLMs out there, all various uses and tunes and things like that. They're going to have to get very good at figuring out how to secure their parametric data while making it accessible to people who actually need it. Again, that's going to be the trade-off. And I think we're always going to see a world where there's going to be these distillation attacks because people are going to change their vectors in many instances. And I also think in many instances, they may have already occurred. We just didn't know they were there. In other words, there was no detection capabilities, anomaly detection to figure out that they occurred. And so we may enter a world the next few years where these LLMs kind of normalize. In other words, they're plus or minus 5% of each other because they're training from each other because of these this distillation attacks, things like that. And I'm not sure if that's good or bad. I think that it's probably not fair that these LLM providers are kind of getting screwed over if they're the ones who did the innovation and they're not able to earn from it and provide value from it, then that's a bit of an issue. And also people who are looking for distinct capabilities that an LLM has, and that's going to be of value to the LLM. And if you see it replicated within another LLM through these distillation, absorbing of the parametric knowledge, things like that, that's not really fair. And I think that's what we're going to see probably for the next few years. This kind of spy versus spy stuff, and we'll see where it goes. So don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos on this channel. Also check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100+ LinkedIn learning courses, and of course my generative AI architecture course out of Go Cloud Careers. And finally, my latest books, Unlocking the Power of Cloud and An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, stay very, very safe. The magical YouTube algorithm thinks this is another one of my videos that you should watch next. Take care, guys.